Ciao a tutte le ascoltatrici e a tutti gli ascoltatori di Radio Quarre, ben ritrovate e ben ritrovati a Music in a Box. Sono Salvatore e il Music in a Box è il nostro programma dedicato alle interviste. Oggi con me c'è Luca. Ciao Luca.
Ciao Salvatore, ciao a tutte, ciao a tutti.
Luca oggi è con me perché intervisteremo un super ospite. Agli inizi della storia di Radio Quar, mai avremmo pensato di intervistare un musicista così importante. È uno dei produttori discografici più influenti al mondo, icona anti-establishment, purista del suono, al punto di non amare l'etichetta di produttore, ma di preferire quella di ingegnere del suono, frontman di band seminali quali Big Black, Rapeman e Shellac, chitarrista, critico musicale, fondatore degli Electrical Audio, ovvero una delle più importanti realtà del rock indipendente. Steve Albini è tutto questo, ma anche incredibilmente molto altro. Hi Steve, thank you for being here.
Ciao, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here with us on Radio Quar. And before we start with questions, we bring you greetings and love from Francesca, the friend responsible for the selection you listened to a couple of years ago. Who could not participate today. And can you say something if you want to send your greetings to Francesca?
Yeah, I was very surprised. Someone sent a link to the mixtape, and out of curiosity, during the depths of the pandemic lockdown, I played the mixtape, and I was really surprised. It was super comprehensive and very tastefully selected, and a lot of the music was really obscure, like some stuff not the sort of thing you typically see in, like, a journalistic bio of Steve Albini records or something like that. It was obviously the work that it required a lot of attention, it was assembled very carefully, and I thought it was really nice overview of my whole professional life. It was really interesting. It's not often that I can listen to something about me and be surprised by it, and be even interested in it particularly. I get enough of me in my normal life, So I was very surprised and very pleased that it went beyond just the big names and the most famous records. It was a very carefully organized mixtape. I thought it was well done.
Thank you.
And awesome. She will be happy to hear.
Yeah. Let's start with the first question. What was the spark that made you want to become first a musician and then a sound engineer?
Well, my family, when I was a child, wasn't particularly musical. We had a record player, and my father played some novelty songs on the guitar, but there was some music in the house, but it wasn't a particularly musical family. My older brother, Marty, had collected some hard rock records, things like The Who and Alice Cooper and that sort of thing. And then when he left home to go to college, he kind of abandoned his record collection in the house, and so I started playing those records for myself, and that was my first real exposure to rock music. I didn't really I didn't really have an appreciation for music beyond entertainment. And I would have been about 15 or 16 years old at that point. And then my circle of friends at school, we were all starting to get interested in art and music and culture, and one of my friends gave me a copy of the first Ramones album. And that first Ramones album was kind of a life-changing thing for me. That music and that way of looking at the world was completely new to me, and it turned me on in a tremendous way. I started voraciously looking for other music like that, other culture and art and thinking like that. And I was lucky that I was in a small town in Montana, but there happened to be a university in that town. And so there was some culture from the students bringing their record collections and their book collections with them from wherever they came from in the world. And this is a kind of a normal thing in America, is that even in a very rural state, like I grew up in Montana, and Montana is a very rural state. It's mostly agricultural and mountainous, and it's very beautiful, but it's not urban. There's not a lot of high culture there. But in the college towns, there is a kind of an oasis of culture and progressive thinking and youthful energy. And so I got to experience that, and that all informed my early tastes in music. It was the stuff that was brought there to this college town by people coming from elsewhere. And there was a secondhand record shop that I used to go to. I was a fixture in the secondhand record store. I was constantly going. I knew every record in the store by the time the year was out. And my friends and I decided to start a band, and we started a band that was kind of loosely patterned after the Ramones. And that began my entire interest in music, and I just pursued it ever since. When I left home to go to college, I wanted to go to a city that was big enough that it would have an active music scene. And so I came to Chicago, and Chicago had a fantastic underground punk scene in the late 70s, early 80s. And I immediately got involved in the music scene here. I was up to my neck in music. I was seeing bands every week. I was going to the record store twice a week. I was listening to the underground radio. I was, reading all the fanzines. I was spending all of my spare money on records. I was completely immersed in the underground music scene in Chicago when I came here. And that just became a lens for me to see the whole world, like the way all of my friends and peers were operating in this music scene informed my thinking about the whole rest of my life. And it still does. Like to this day, I still think about things as though I were a teenager in a punk rock band, and I'm doing things according to the ethics and the standards that were imprinted on me during that period.
Okay, thank you. And curiosity, you still listen again the first album to Ramones?
I mean, I have completely internalized it, but yeah, when I hear it, it reminds me why I love it. Yeah. I was recently asked to write an appreciation for the liner notes of a reissue of the live Ramones album called It's Alive, which is a fantastic record. It's possibly the greatest rock live album ever made. And that record, listening to that record again and writing an appreciation of it, like, allowed me to sort of solidify in my mind a lot of ideas that music brought out from me. And I'm certain it made me a better person. It made me a more open-minded person, and made me appreciate more and different people and things around me than I would have otherwise.
Thank you.
Great. And as we said during the introduction in Italian, most people know that you don't really like the term producer, preferring to be called a sound engineer. Can you tell us a bit about your philosophy and your thoughts regarding recording music for other artists?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not that sensitive about it. Let's put it that way. Like, if someone calls me a producer, I don't feel insulted anymore. There was a period in my life where that would feel like an insult to me, but at the moment, I'm not so concerned about how other people describe me. But my role in the studio is essentially a purely technical one. Like, over the course of history of the music business, the producer is the person who's responsible for making the significant decisions about the record. Like, we're going to have these songs on the record. This song is going to be played at this tempo. We're going to add some strings and piano in the bridge. Like, these sort of big creative decisions about the record, they're the responsibility of the producer. And I just don't do that. I don't take that role. When I'm in the studio with the band, they get to make all of the decisions. Like, what songs are we going to play? Well, that's up to you guys. How fast should this song be? That's up to you. You know, should we put a trumpet in the middle? Yeah, that's up to you. You know, I'm completely agnostic about these decisions, and I think that's important because it means that the music that the band is making is then more purely an expression of their ideas, and it isn't crippled by the limitations of my imagination. You know, I know for a fact that the bands that I work with do make better decisions about their own music than decisions I would make on their behalf. You know, they understand their music better than I do. They understand why they are operating in the way they are operating. You know, I may not even remember their names. You know, it's rude for me. It would be rude for me to try to take control of this situation and sculpt the record to my tastes. And also my tastes are pretty fucked up. You know, like the things that I like, the things that amuse me and that I like as music, like I don't expect other people to like that stuff. And so it would be a mistake for me to take some normal band that just wants to make a normal recording of their normal songs, and for me to make them perverse to suit my own tastes and my own perversion. Like, that would just be inappropriate. And so I just don't do it.
It reminds me of the movie director Woody Allen, in a way. I was reading interviews of him when asked about working with actors, and he is saying, I don't direct them. It would be, they are great professionals. They are great at doing their job. They just do it. They read the script, they do it. I don't direct them. If I would probably make something worse than what they do themselves. You kind of said the same thing.
Well, I'm uncomfortable being compared to Woody Allen, who's an extraordinary creep. And but sure, I guess philosophically that's consistent. But I wish you could find another example.
Okay.
Maybe
fair enough.
Maybe John Cassavetes is a better example.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Steve, in 1997, you founded Electrical Audio, a double recording studio with analog technology because, and I quote what I read in an interview, you hate digital sound. Can you tell us more about your studio?
Well, I think it's inappropriate to say that I hate digital sound, but the studio was built as an analog studio with digital capability because even in 1997, it was obvious that most sessions in the future were going to be conducted digitally. So we have full digital capabilities at the studio. I'm speaking to you from an office in the studio building, and it's a fully capable digital and analog studio. There's nothing, nothing crippled about our studio. But I work in the analog methods because I have a very strong, I feel a sense of responsibility to the bands that I work with, that I want their music to survive as part of the record of our culture. I mean, the word recording, you know, it means you're making a record, you're making a permanent record of something. And the analog methods are the best way to ensure that in 100 years, someone can hear what our music sounded like. You know, all of the digital technologies are very, very powerful and very useful in the moment, but they don't create a durable, permanent, physical object that can be recovered in the future and used to play back the music, right? Any digital recording requires the software to play it and the computer system that can support that software and the proprietary permissions from the companies that control the licensing on that software. There's just a lot of fragility in the structure, in the hierarchy of a digital session. The paradigm requires a lot of parts to be working correctly, and I don't have any confidence that those protocols and those permissions are going to survive in the long term, you know, 100 years from now, something like that. Whereas an analog tape, you put it on the shelf and it just sits there. And in 100 years, you take it off the shelf and put it on the machine and play it, and the music comes back just like always. So I feel like my role as a guardian of the record of the historical archive is better served by making analog masters, which are durable and permanent, than it is by creating a bunch of files, which maybe exist on a cloud somewhere. You know, that's the fundamental reason why I maintain and persist in working in the analog domain. I also think, I happen to think that it is not a limited format. Like, I feel like I can accomplish anything in music that I need to from a production standpoint using analog methods. There are some specific circus tricks that you can do digitally that are more awkward to do in the analog domain. Things like making radical changes to the sound after it's been recorded are much easier to do in the digital domain. And the defaults in a lot of cases, so that very few sounds in the digital paradigm, very few sounds are recorded once and then left alone. Like, normally when you record something digitally, you massage it and edit it and fuck around with it and move it around and play with it and make some kind of a idealized version of it. And that's just a standard practice for digital engineers. And I don't have experience with that, and I prefer to get things right and then record them, rather than to record something and then try to manipulate it to a point where I think it's acceptable, you know.
Yeah.
I don't have any real objection to the sound quality of digital recording. Like, when I hear competently done digital recordings, I think they sound fine. Like, the sound quality is not a problem.
Okay.
And that brings to mind, regarding your production, are you producing more music digitally or analog now?
My sessions, the sessions that I'm responsible for, are analog from beginning to end. They are often digitized at some point, like you make a digital copy of the analog master for distribution or for synchronization or licensing or something like that. But the actual master tape is going to be an analog master. I do very rarely work on sessions that are someone else's responsibility. Like, someone started a session at home on a digital platform and they bring it to the studio because they want to do some overdubs in the studio. Then it's a digital session from beginning, and I'm working on that session. It stays in the digital domain. Or I just did a record where the band wanted to record live performances of their music for the basic recording, and then take a digital session from that live recording and do extra overdubs and editing and gimmickry at home. So the session began as an analog session with me using all analog techniques, but it was then transferred into the digital domain, and the band is executing the rest of the production digitally on their own. So that happens sometimes, but if it's a session, if someone calls me on the phone and says, Steve, let's make a record, it's going to be an analog session from beginning to end.
And talking about the support, I mean, the only analog support that we listen to now is vinyl, of course. And do you know if your record end up on a vinyl record analog all the way through, or if they pass from a digital transformation at some point?
Yeah, I mean, most record mastering has a digital intermediate step, but like I said, I'm not religious about this. I'm not critical of digital philosophically. I just want to make sure that my part of the job, that what I am responsible for, is going to survive, and that means that it's going to be in the analog domain. And after that, if they digitize it for use on downloads or streaming, or if there's a digital step in the mastering, like that doesn't concern me. The professional work product, the thing that's going to be on the shelf in the closet that says this is my album on the spine, like that's going to be an analog master, and that will survive, a couple hundred years for sure.
Great. And considering, I mean, your approach to recording that you mentioned before, and you're being agnostic to the music, are there differences for you in recording artists as diverse as PJ Harvey and Mono, or the Stooges and Neurosis, for example?
Yeah, I mean, every session has some unique requirement. Some sessions, the music is more explosive and more aggressive and more powerful, and the whole idea of the session is to convey this sense of power or energy, right? Some sessions are more subtle and more gentle and more beautiful, and the job there is to convey to the listener the sensitivity and the gentleness and the beauty of it. And so that requires different techniques. Often because there are different instruments, or even compositionally, there can be some very dramatic things that have to happen in music, and they require different things of you technically. So yeah, you have to be aware of you have to be sensitive to the kind of music that's being recorded. But that's different from me being directorial and shaping the music actively myself. I need to be competent and capable to do what is required to make a good recording of any kind of music. I have done records where it's one person singing and playing a guitar, and I have done records where it's 40 people all playing simultaneously. What's required of me is different for every session. Mm-hmm. And if I treat everybody the same, like if I use the same techniques on every session, then they're going to be inappropriate half the time. So I have to have for example, a big collection of microphones, because the microphones all behave differently, and you need to be able to suit the perfect microphone for the sound. The physical arrangement of the musicians, like there's some music where the people being in sort of very close proximity with good eye contact is super important, because they're getting a timing and emphasis cues from each other, and they need to be able to see each other well, and they need to be able to react instantly live in person. A lot of improvised music is like that, and a lot of music that has improvised performance details. Like the people need to feel comfortable and feel like they could reach out and tap somebody on the shoulder and get an answer like that. That's an important part of the session. And then there are some sessions where everybody just has their nose down and they're playing their part and they don't care about the rest of the world. They just want their thing to be perfect. And that's a different kind of session. And I need to be capable of both of those.
Okay. Steve, a direct question. What are your favorite sounds? Not just instruments. What kind of sound excites you the most?
We have two cats at my house. They're brothers, Bacon and Dynamite. Bacon is a kind of a dummy. He's a big, foolish oaf. Like he barges into the room and he like tries to get your attention. And if he wants something, if he wants to go someplace, he just like stomps. He'll walk over anybody. He doesn't. He's like a bulldozer. He's the Italian nickname for him would be Buffalo. He's like a buffalo, right? But the other cat, his brother, is named Dynamite, and he is a very nervous, very shy cat, and he doesn't like to be seen by other people. He doesn't like to be held. He gets really, anxious and leaves the room if he sees any activity, right? So when Dynamite, the nervous one, if I'm sitting on the couch and Dynamite comes into the room and he's willing to sit next to me and let me pet him and he starts purring, that's a very satisfying sound because it means that he's at peace and he's not agitated and he's not uncomfortable and not upset. So the sound of that particular cat purring means that he is at peace with the world and he's comfortable where he is right now. And that makes me feel very good. So I think that the critical thing for me is that when I hear a sound, it's not just a sound. The sound is a window into what's happening in the mind of the person making the sound. Mm-hmm. And this is true from my earliest experience with music. When I hear a record or music, it's not just sound. It's a communion with the person making the music. It's a way for me to be part of their mind for a moment, and that, to me, that's the critical aspect of music that makes it different from just the wind blowing through the trees or traffic noise or whatever. Like the sound of something has meaning, and so when I'm working on a record, I recognize that it's important for me not to interfere with the sound, because the sound is the only way for the musician to communicate with their audience. That's the only way. And so I have to be as transparent as possible in allowing that communication. This goes back to, it's kind of stupid, but it goes back to what I was describing about my reaction to the Ramones. Like when I heard the Ramones music, I heard that this sense of this feeling of mania, like they were gripped by this crazy idea of the music they were making. And the subject matter of the music, a lot of it was ugly or base or simple, but they were taking it seriously and it was animating them, right? So I knew that about them from listening to their music. I knew what they liked. I knew what was important to them. And I knew what made them excited and animated. And so I felt like I was part of that expression. I was part of the equation as a listener because I was understanding this about them through their music, right? And that, to me, is the function of music. It's not just a decoration for my ears. It's a way for me to participate in someone else's creative process. I become part of their mind, And that sort of philosophically has driven a lot of my behavior and a lot of my decisions in the studio, is wanting to respect this kind of communication or this kind of communion.
Amazing. And going to Italy, you have produced some Italian artists as well, like Useda, Carletto Sconti's Neo, 24 Grana, Zoo, and many others. Do you have some interesting memories of working with some of them?
Well, in particular, Useda have been very close friends. I've worked on many of their records, and they feel like family to me. Like all of them are astonishing musicians. Davide Oliveri, the drummer, is an impeccable drummer. Like one of the best musicians, one of the best drummers I've ever encountered. And he's kind of not unknown, but he's kind of underappreciated in the world of drumming, as such a thing is, like the world of drumming. What a stupid idea. But and Raffaele, the bass player, he has a distinctive style on the bass. It's perfectly suited to the music. He's a very sensitive musician. Agostino is an expressive guitar player. His guitar playing is uniquely his style, and you can hear elements of folk music, traditional music, Italian dance music, and you can hear this psychedelic influence. I'm just in awe of them as musicians. I think they are just astonishing, but also very welcoming people, and I love their approach to the music, the way the band organizes the music in a very careful way. And then Giovanna is a kind of a poetic wind that blows through the music. It's her personality and her drama as a vocalist is the emotional center of the music. And I just love the way all the pieces fit together. I've had many great experiences with them. My band Shellac has taken them on tour with us several times. I couldn't feel more warmly toward any people than I feel toward Useda.
Yeah. Is there an Italian artist you would like to work with?
I have to say, I don't spend very much energy on these kind of ambitions. I feel like it's a little bit awkward. Like if I say, "Oh, I very much want to work with this band," and then they hear about it and they choose not to work with me, there's a little bit of a not an insult, but it's like when you're a school child, when you're in school and you find out that someone has a crush on you, but you don't like them back. There's something slightly emotionally bruising about that. So I don't open myself up to that kind of pain. I basically keep my door open, and anyone who wants to walk in can walk in.
Okay, so we're not going to ask you the same question about overall artists, not just Italian ones, because you're going to get the same, which is fine. And what's coming next in terms of productions? We saw recently a picture with Mono, with whom you recorded once again their record. Do you have anything else that you can talk about?
I'm circumspect about talking about other people's records. I don't do it very often because let's say on the calendar I have a session planned with the Beatles in a couple of weeks. I don't have a session planned with the Beatles, but let's just say I have a session planned on the books for the Beatles, and we do the session and it doesn't go well and nothing happens with it. Then in 6 months, people will be asking, "Hey, what happened? What about this session with the Beatles that was supposed to happen?" And then I have to say, "Oh yeah, we did it. It didn't go well. It was a disaster," and then that by itself can be a problem. So I tend not to discuss other people's records. My band Shellac, we finished an album over a year ago. We had our next album was finished over a year ago, and it has just been in the production process ever since, like trying to find an appropriate pressing plant, trying to get the details worked out about the artwork, trying to get good quality test pressings from the pressing plant, blah, 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 you know, like a million problems. So someday, hopefully soon, but someday there will be a new Shellac album. But as for other people, I don't really like to talk about their records.
Okay. Steve, then just a very specified curiosity from 1996. Is it true that Just Fred of Fred Schneider was recorded in only 2 weeks?
Yeah, I think that's about right. Yeah. That's a normal schedule for me to do an album length project, is 2 weeks or less. That's a normal schedule for me.
Mm-hmm. And
that was a really great experience. Working with Fred Schneider was incredible. Like, he was a hero of mine. The B-52s were a very important band for me, very inspirational band. And he was a hero of mine. I admired him tremendously. Getting to meet him, getting to know him, and then introducing him to a bunch of other punk musicians who were also equivalently like enthusiastic and very excited to be working with him. That sort of rejuvenated his relationship with the underground. And then he took a band on tour and did a solo tour with some of these musicians, and they've become, you know, good friends. And I'm very, very happy and proud of that association. I enjoyed working on that record. I loved hanging out with Fred. All the musicians involved were really great. Everybody rose to the occasion. I really enjoyed working on that record.
Okay. Sì, vai Luca, scusami.
Vado io. So your first band as a musician was Big Black, at least the first recording that we have.
That first record, the first really public thing. I was in a band in high school, and then I was in another couple of bands in Chicago that didn't really do anything of note. But yeah, the first record that was released to the public was a Big Black record. Yeah.
And with Big Black, we feel that you took the brutal post-punk of Chrome, Suicide, and Killing Joke and taking it to the next level, foreshadowing what will happen with Cop Shot Cop, Jesus Lizard, and Ministry, amongst other things. Where does that sound come from? And that idea of using Roland?
I had been sort of fascinated with mechanical rhythms. I really like some bands that were inspirational to me used a drum machine, bands like Suicide and Cabaret Voltaire. And there was a kind of a crossover between the electronic experimental world and the punk world. And some of those bands, like there was a French band called Metal Urbain, and some of those bands kept the energy level of punk, but were using electronics or mechanical rhythms or drum machines, and I gravitated toward that music, and that a lot of that music was inspirational to me, and so I was imitating the bands that I admired, bands like Chrome and Tuxedo Moon and Suicide. I was imitating those bands, but in the context of the Chicago punk scene, I was able to work. I was exposed to a more physical, more aggressive, more powerful version of that kind of music, and it was less academic and more physical and more aggressive. I was influenced by my peers in the Chicago underground scene, like bands like Naked Ray Gun and the Effigies, and those bands influenced me. And in some cases, some of the members of those bands, like Jeff Pezzati and Santiago Durango from Naked Ray Gun, were eventually in Big Black as band members. And so it's natural, the cross-pollination of our influences created a sort of a hybrid music. Like if I was left to my own devices in my apartment making records by myself, they probably would have sounded more like the first Big Black record, which was clearly influenced by things like Tuxedo Moon and Fact Tricks and other electronic and very simple electronic music. But by being part of the punk scene, I was able to synthesize that influence into a general aesthetic that Big Black sort of thrived on.
Yeah. Steve, with at Action Park, the first shellac release, in those 57 minutes, you were once again ahead of most of the different sound of the 19th. How do you see this record in the context of that decade?
I'm not good at this sort of sociological comparisons. All I know is that when we started the band, we had some core ideas that we wanted to pursue, and we have maintained the band in sort of respecting those original ideas. And the lifespan of the band has been long, I think, partly because we have avoided trying to be contemporary. Like we haven't really tried to bring in the whatever the current hip thing is. We haven't tried to make ourselves relevant to a contemporary sound. We have been concentrated on pursuing our own ideas, and those ideas are quite flexible. Like we've been a band for more than 25 years, and I still feel like we have room to grow, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that you have removed the Big Black and shellac music from streaming services. We have been reading your thoughts regarding the music industry. Can you tell us more about it?
Well, we have not removed them from all streaming services. Specifically, we have removed our band from Spotify. Spotify is a uniquely bad actor in the streaming environment. They are uniquely destructive in that their business model is predicated on the idea that the bands will not get any money. So the function of Spotify as a tool is to take money from the advertising community, from the advertising world, and from subscriptions, and funnel it toward record labels and other copyright holders that have large volumes of material. So, and in the process, they keep a big portion of the money themselves. They are dishonest, and also they're dishonest in their relationships with the bands and the music, but they are also dishonest with the customers. Like the customers may have a playlist, and on that playlist there will be some music that Spotify has generated itself, so that people are playing music that was created just to fill space on playlists, where all of the money then returns to Spotify. Spotify becomes the record label, they become the artist, they become the editor and the curator. And they have also created a system where the bands and the record labels can pay a legitimate payola to have their music promoted into these playlists and streams. And they keep that money as well. So it's an extremely dishonest system that's extremely corrupt. And it's predicated on the idea that everybody can make money except the band, except the musicians. Those are the only people who don't get paid. And the amount of money that comes in from Spotify streams is trivial. In the lifespan of a band, They will make way more money playing gigs or selling T-shirts or selling records at the merchandise table. They're going to make so much more money doing that stuff than they will ever make from Spotify. That if you just remove Spotify from the equation, it doesn't hurt that much. Like our music is still available on Bandcamp, for example. I think Bandcamp is an ethical streaming service.
Yes.
You can directly support the band by purchasing a record from Bandcamp. You can buy physical media from Bandcamp. You can go to the band store and support them in a number of ways, get a bunch of different merchandise. You can buy individual songs. You can buy downloadable versions of the album. And Spotify also regularly does a kind of amnesty for fees, where on certain Fridays of the year, if you buy a record on Bandcamp, the band gets 100% of the money. And I think that's an honorable and ethical way to conduct business, to provide an avenue for me to directly support a band and provide a platform for them to expose their music to the world, but without being predatory.
Yeah, Bandcamp is the best. We all agree in the independent circuit is definitely the best. But what's the difference in your view between Spotify and the likes of Tidal, Deezer, Apple Music, Amazon Music?
Okay, they are all slightly different, and I can criticize each of them in different ways. But the one, obviously the very worst one, is Spotify. So there are things to criticize about every streaming service, about every music service. I think this is a temporary arrangement for music. I think this idea that there are different catalogs of music that are available only from certain providers, I think that is an inherently crippled way to appreciate music, and it won't survive. It's the short-term solution for generating profit for a music industry, but it's not a long-term solution, and it won't survive. None of these companies are fundamentally profitable. They are all building an audience and utilizing the tools of e-commerce, advertising and info sharing and that sort of stuff, information gathering. They're utilizing all of these things to generate income. But the core model of selling music to people is simply not profitable. So those services won't survive in their current form. And I think the evolution of them from here is going to be toward more open, more equitable, more fair, like, mechanism on the internet.
Yeah. Steve, another question. Last year, Mimi Parker from Law passed away, and it was a truly, truly terrible loss. Do you have something to share about working with her?
She just had the most beautiful, most sensitive voice, and the sound of Low, the sound of that band, is predicated on the sound of the two voices, Alan and Mimi, singing together. Like those voices fit together like a puzzle piece, and those two voices together creates an entire image of music. And I really admired her, and I admired the way they took their music slowly. Like, they provided the time for a single note to become important. A lot of music, they try to force things down your throat. Like, here's this heavy riff, or here's some production effects to excite you, or here's some fireworks show, something to keep your attention. But Low's music was never like that. Low's music sort of operated on the basis that you are going to pay attention, so we can do something subtle and beautiful and know that you're going to pay attention to it. There was a trusting element of their music where they trusted that the audience would give them enough attention to do something slow and soft and subtle and beautiful. And that's an extremely brave, very emotionally and artistically exposed way to conduct yourself. You know, it takes a very brave person to sing one note and hold that one note for 15 seconds, and that's the whole story. You know, I really admired them tremendously, and they became good friends, and I love them as people. And I was devastated when Mimi died, especially because she had, when she was previously diagnosed with cancer, she had gone through a course of treatment, and things were looking good, you know. And then very quickly things went south when the cancer was diagnosed again. That was very sad. I'm glad that I got to see her in the interval when she was healthy, when she was still feeling good. I'm glad I got to see her and spend some time with her. Our bands were on tour at the same time, and we crossed paths a number of places. And I'm pleased that I got to hang out with them a little bit more.
Thank you, Steve.
And how is the Chicago scene now? Can we still talk about the musical scene over there?
Yeah, I mean, the physical expression of the music changes all the time. Like where the shows are happening, you know. There was a scene in the 90s where there was a lot of money being put into the music scene and the sort of explosion post Nirvana. And so there were a lot of big venues. There were, you know, bars and public venues where there was a lot of music being played. And then when the money started to drain out, then the sort of natural expression of music changed, and it became, okay, there are going to be some informal shows. We're going to do some house parties and loft parties and things like that. Much more informal stuff started going on, and that was all still very invigorating. And COVID obviously has had a really bad effect on live music in public. There are a lot of people who are still not comfortable being in a crowd. I'm one of them. I don't particularly like being in a crowded environment. I wear a mask at all times when I'm in public, and it's awkward for me to be performing in a room full of people, knowing that it's dangerous for there to be a room full of people. You know, so COVID has had a huge effect on everybody's sort of performing philosophy, and just the mechanics of putting shows together is now quite cumbersome.
Steve, you will soon embark in a European tour with Shellac. What can we expect from you, Trainer and Weston, at Primavera Sound?
Well, as I said, we have had a new album that was recorded a long time ago, and we've been playing some of those songs for a few years, and we'll probably play a few more of the newer material. And then no real departure from our normal practice. We'll show up, we'll kick ass, and we'll leave.
Okay. Luca,
your mic is on mute.
Sorry. You already told us about the new music coming up for Shellac. We don't have the dates yet.
Sorry, no. We finished it over a year ago. It was supposed to be finished in 2020, but COVID intervened and we couldn't finish the record. And then in 2021, we had a West Coast tour that had been postponed. And we canceled that tour because the Delta variant was, 2022 maybe. No, 2021. We canceled that tour because the Delta variant had just arrived and was being really devastating. So we used the time that we would have used on tour, we used that time to finish the album. So the album was finished in the fall of 2021. And since then, we've just been trying to get the final details sorted out. The artwork, the pressing has been a real problem. A lot of the pressing plants were backed up for many months. And so we're trying to do something to circumvent that. And that involves working with new technologies, and those new technologies have their own problems. So there will be a new shellac album eventually, I promise.
We are gonna be waiting.
Steve, before the last question, I want to tell you that I also hate Steely Dan music. For me, it's like music.
Yeah, I don't. There's nothing about Steely Dan I like. I don't like the music. The way they behave, sort of artistically, I think is a very sort of abusive way to treat other people in the studio, to like try to control other people to perform your music in this kind of a directorial fashion. That seems very cheap and abusive to me. And also the end result is, it's not, I hate every single thing about it. And then I also hate the conversations I have with people where they try to defend Steely Dan to me, where they're trying to convince me that no, really, you do like this music if you just, you know, and you know, these conversations go nowhere, and they're unpleasant conversations, because and it makes me think less of someone. You know, this music is hideous and these people are awful, and you're defending them. That makes you a defender of the ugly and the awful. You know, I don't want to think that about you. You're my friend. Don't do this. You
know. Steve, the last question. What are the future plans for Steve Albini?
Well, I'm quite old now. I turned 60 last year. I'll be 61 this summer. It's you know, it's a biological effect that as you age, your hearing and your mental facilities decline. I feel like I'm still doing things at, you know, acceptable rate now. I still feel like I have my attention, I have my hearing. I still feel like I'm doing good work, so I'm going to keep working for a while longer. But there will come a time when I'll have to retire, when either I can't hear well enough to make music effectively, or my my stamina won't allow me to work long enough days to get productive work done. I see that as a you know, a realistic outcome, is that I'm going to have to retire eventually. I have a few more years in me, I think, so I'm going to keep plugging away. Eventually, when I retire, I hope the studio survives without me. I still hope Electrical Audio can continue to be a resource for everybody, Italian bands and American. Mm-hmm. But I don't really have a plan. I'm coming to work every day and making a record, and then we'll see what tomorrow is.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for all.
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been fun.
Thank you. Luca, have you another question for Steve?
I think we bothered him enough. I think we got we got a lot of nice things on tape, so I hope our listeners are gonna like them.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you.
Arrivederci.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao. Thank you.